Welcome to the monthly broadcast of the Utah Valley Technology and Genealogy Group. My name is Gerhard Roof. We are registered with the IRS and the state of Utah as an educational nonprofit corporation. We normally start with a word of prayer. I've asked Jerry Castillo to offer that invocation.
Our Father in heaven, we're grateful for this opportunity to gather together as family history enthusiasts and those who are concerned with looking for family and for finding information about our families. We're grateful to our presenter who is joining us today and grateful for her willingness to share with us some of her knowledge. We pray, Father, for thy blessings to be with us all, that we may be able to learn something. May we have thy spirit with us. We ask in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Jerry. Today is the 11th of April, 2026. Our next monthly broadcast will be on the 9th of May. You can receive notification of the monthly speakers and their topics from our news release blog and from our website at uvtagg.org or blog.uvtag.org. We welcome the supporting members of our group on this Zoom broadcast and anyone else watching using Facebook Live on our Facebook page or on the recording on Facebook or the UVTag YouTube channel. If you would like to make comments or ask questions during this broadcast, please use the chat feature in Zoom or post them in comments on the Facebook post for this broadcast. When the presenter asks questions, those of you on Zoom may also unmute your mic and turn on your camera to interact directly with the presenter. For those of you who would like to know more about our group, you may request a copy of our monthly newsletter, Tagology, by emailing your request to uvtaginfo@gmail.com. We are so pleased to have Peggy Clemens Lauritzen as our presenter today. Her topic is entitled Analysis and Correlation, a Case Study on a Missing Family. She describes this class as follows. One of the elements of the Genealogical Proof Standard is analyzing your information and documentation and correlating it with other known facts. Does the research trail end when you can't find the family? This is an advanced level class presenting a case study that was used in a First Families of Ohio application. It particularly drills deeper into census research when an ancestor was supposedly missed. By correlating the missing information with known information of the time period, a new family story emerges. We're looking forward to this topic, Peggy. By the way, Peggy is an accredited genealogist and an AG lecturer also. I like her other acronym, FOGS, which I believe stands for Fellow of the Ohio Genealogical Society. Is that right, Peggy?
It is. It is.
Peggy has been involved with genealogy since before she was even born. She says one of her favorite pictures is of her mother doing cemetery research or preparing for that 4 days before Peggy was born. She is the daughter of an avid genealogist, both her mother and father. She was spending time in courthouses and cemeteries while other children were playing on swings and going to the beach. The love of her family's history has never left her. With her experience as a family history center director, she is a frequent speaker at genealogical societies, workshops, seminars, and webinars, where she loves bringing genealogy to life. Some of those would include the Ohio Genealogical Society, Ohio State University, Brigham Young University, and many other state and local societies. She's a former member of the board of directors for the Utah Genealogical Association and the Association of Professional Genealogists. Peggy, take it away.
I I say let's go have some fun. And hang on just for a moment. I will bring this up. And it always takes just a moment to get where
We've
we
got
need
the
to
wrong
be.
screen, Peggy. That's your presenter screen. There it is.
Okay, we're good to go then. All righty. Well, I am excited to be back here with UV Tag again because I was here a few years ago when Marie Anderson had introduced me, and I watched some of the classes on the Facebook feed, and I thought, well, this is kind of cool. Then they asked me to teach, so I'm kind of in and out. So this is a long title today: Analysis and Correlation, a case study on a missing family in the census. Now, Gerhard mentioned that I have been doing this since before I was born. I've got proof. This is the picture of my mom and dad leaving a July 4th picnic, not too far from where I am right now here in Ohio. They were on their way to transcribe tombstones in what would eventually become early records of the Ohio Genealogical Society. And 4 days later, I was born. So at this time, my sisters were 16, 19, and 21. So I was the one going with mom and dad when they went into courthouses and went into graveyards, when they interviewed family members that were born in the 1880s. I was there, and I've always loved history and genealogy, except at that time period, the classes and the meetings that we went to, they were boring. And about when I was 13 years old, I remember thinking to myself, I was interested in a topic that was being talked about, but it was losing my interest. And I remember thinking, if I am ever the one up front, I want people looking at their watches, not because they were bored like me when I was young, but because they can't believe it's over already. That's I want them to be engaged because genealogy, as we all know, can be a boring topic when you talk to your relatives and their eyes start rolling into the back of their head and you know you've lost them. So hopefully I'm not that way. I don't know. We'll see. When we talk about the genealogical proof standard, we are talking about five main components that we have done reasonably exhaustive research, that we have complete and accurate citations to the source or the sources of each information item, that they're a test through the process of analysis and correlation of all sources, information items, and evidence, that there's a resolution of conflicts among those evidence items, and that we have written a soundly reasoned, coherently written conclusion. Now, it doesn't matter if you're a professional genealogist or it doesn't matter if you're just the family historian. We need to make sure that we meet this criteria because someday when we're gone, if our research looks haphazard and we file by piles instead of a good organized way, you know what's going to happen to that research that you've worked so hard on. It's going to be tossed. People are going to look at that and they say, well, I don't know what she was doing, and it's going to be gone. So we need to make sure that our research is preserved by these good standards that have been established. And today we're going to be concentrating on number three, on analysis and correlation. So the definition. Analysis, that means you're going to break down a complex topic or substance into smaller parts in order to gain a better understanding of it. It's a thorough study. Correlation, that is the process of establishing a relationship or a connection between phenomena or things. That, when we go into a courthouse or a library, our main goal is connection. What can we locate that we have written out into a research plan? How are we going to be able to connect this child to these parents, or to this wife to her parents when there's no maiden name? We need to connect. So that's how we do this as part of this analysis and correlation project. So, we look for sources that are documents and books and certificates and journals. We look for information items that are items within a source, like the witnesses or the probate records or a journal entry. All of those can add up, as well as evidence. How an item answers each research question. All of these work together. So, my dad, as he got older and his hair got whiter, he looked more like Colonel Sanders than Colonel Sanders did. He just had that look. And they always said whenever he gave a talk at church or anything, they always started craving chicken. So my dad, he comes from a family that, to be honest, was not a real stellar family, but all of his people, have been easy to find up to a certain point. All of my family members on my mom and my dad's side are all from south of the Ohio River. I live in Ohio. I was born and raised here, but I don't have any Ohio ancestors, I thought. So as we go into looking at dad's lineage, this is going up through his father's line. And we get to John Jack Rowe, follows on up through Edward Morris Rowe. Well, then we go a little bit different direction, and we've got John Jack Rowe, who also is going up through Asa Ellender Littleton's line. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. Let me look at this more closely. So it's the same up to a point till we get to John Jack Rowe. And then he descends from Edward Morris Rowe. He descends from Leander Goddard or Ellender Leander. She goes by a lot of names, but it's the same person. I'm like, okay, I got to figure this one out because this is kind of confusing. When we start any genealogy research, we usually go with the big four. We start out with census records and vital records and probate records and land records. Those are the ones that have the low-hanging fruit, that we often will find something about our ancestors without a whole lot of research. And what do they all have in common? Think about this for a minute. What do they all have in common? Well, I'm going to tell you. Money. Almost every one of these, you can backtrack to money. And my main rule in genealogical research is to follow the money. But not only that, is to follow the people who want the money. In census records, as you get further down into the late 1800s and early 1900s, they're asking you how much land you have. What is the value of your land? Agricultural records on the census records, they will say, how many sheep do you have? How many barrels of brandy do you have? They want to know because taxation is a big part of that too. Vital records, they don't really have anything to do with money, but they do provide proof of parentage and of death and everything, which again leads to money. And then you got probate records. Well, that's usually about money. And then you've got land records. Well, that's almost always all about money because that was so important to be able to pass that on through the family. That's why the laws of primogeniture were established, where the oldest son would basically get all of the land, all of the inheritance, because that way it would be kept within the family instead of parceled out with 18 children and then eventually going into other families like that. Now, one of the best sites that I think that is on Family Search is the Family Search Wiki. And these particular census headings, they should be in your handout. They are only the headings, and they cover 1790 to 1860, and then they go on from 1870 to 1930. Now, why are they important? Because sometimes these census headings, as I'm looking through old census, I like to look at originals if I can. At the top, especially pre-1850, I forget what they're asking for. Let's go back here for a minute. And, in 1850, they're asking for a little bit more information. But 1790 up to 1840, they only list the head of family. And then I'm thinking, okay, are they asking for free white males and females? Are they asking for age ranges and everything? So I need these. And I actually have these downloaded onto my desktop because I refer to them so often and going back and seeing, well, what are they asking for here? Well, they've also done same type of thing for the 1940 census because there are so many questions on there. I just looked to make sure they don't have one for 1950 yet. They probably will eventually, but it goes up to 1940 with 1940 having its own chart. It doesn't blend in with all the rest because there's more questions. Now, on my way of preserving things, I use Dropbox, and I have never ever had an issue with Dropbox. I use the free version. There's a paid version, but I haven't put so many things on here that I have to go into paying for it. What it does is, your file cabinets that you pull out the drawer and you've got all of those file folders. Well, that's what this is, except it is a digital version of it. So when I am looking for things and I want to hang on to it, because you never know when the next time you go look on Ancestry or Family Search or another website that maybe they've taken down what you just looked at. So I will download that and put it into whatever family it is that they belong to. I know you guys are all looking at all of these because you want to know, well, what family is she looking at? Well, this is who I've got. And it goes on for several more screens I could show you. So let me give you an example that right there is my maiden name, the Clemens genealogy. And when you open up that folder, then this is what you see. Up at the top, you see Clemens, Ambrose, 1858. He was born, died 1949. And this is a 1936 letter that he wrote. It's page 3. I don't transcribe the whole thing here, but I do in the standalone databases of which I use both the Legacy Family Tree and Roots Magic. And I collect all this and make sure that it is connecting the family before I upload it to Family Search. When I know it's correct and I know that it's valuable, then it goes on to Family Search. And I explain why I think this is important. Now you'll see some other ones on here that maybe are not quite in that format yet. I'm working on getting them all like that because this way I can go find anybody. I can go find Richard Clemens, who was born in 1886 and died in 1960, and pull up his death certificate right there on the third line. I can find anybody. But if it's just kind of stuck in there, like you take pictures on your camera and then you upload them, maybe to Google Pictures or something like this, you've just changed one mess to a different location and now you have another mess. So I say do it correctly. As you look at a little bit closer detail on these, again, these are my Clemens families, and they all start with the last name, then the first name, B for born, D for died. And if I don't have a death date, I just put a bunch of X's there as a placeholder. And then I do a snippet of what that document actually is. If I were doing this for my parents, then I would put Clemens Chester L., born 1912, died 2002, his 1944 Navy discharge. Clemens Ida Stevens. My mom didn't have a middle name, so I use her maiden name. Born 1913, died 1984. Her 1978 journal notes about her wedding. Me, well, Lauritzen Peggy Clemens, born 1955. I'm not dead yet, although a couple days last week I had to question that because I wasn't feeling that good. And then my 1977 wedding photo. That's how I would list these things. Now, what I'm also changing is that all of these are just hanging in Dropbox. So what I've started to do is I've started to put them into a Word document where up at the top, I will put who it concerns. This is Chester Lee Clemens and Ida Stevens. And then just like you would fill in the documentation or the citation on a regular thing that you're working on, I put that into the box. I just copy and paste it, put it into the box. And then I upload the document because I have a lot of nieces and nephews and in-laws and people that have discovered me that have just said, Peggy, I know you're working on this line. Do you happen to have? Yes, I do. Let me send it to you. And this way, the documentation follows the document. Some people may put the documentation on the back of it, but other people might forget to copy the back of the document where that's written. So I always have that little box up at the top that I can put that in. Here's a couple of other examples. This is my grandfather's death certificate on the left. And again, I copied and pasted and put that documentation or the citation up at the top. This was just something that was hanging in my mom and dad's information that was eventually passed on to me on the right side. So it was a loose paper, but I wrote down where it was, and eventually I found the same thing on Ancestry, but mom and dad also had it from, I guess, when we'd visited one of the courthouses down there. And I put down what is, it's a marriage permission, I do hereby certify. So, I've got that on there as well too. Now, for those of us in Ohio, we had something really good happen a few years ago where it was stated that if you need a birth or a death record, you can go in with your cell phone and you can take a picture of the actual record. You don't have to pay the $26.50 or whatever it is. And I thought, oh, good heavens, I'm going to do that. So during COVID, I visited a number of health departments that were slowly starting to open up, and I began to take pictures of the birth and the death records from my dad's brothers and sisters and their children that had come up here. The only place I had an issue with this was in my own county here, where this woman, she says, well, we can't do that. So I had taken a picture of this, and I said, well, yes, you can. And what I'm going to ask is that you go ahead and make a copy and bring it so that I can take a picture of it. Now, we were not allowed to go into the health department. So I sat out in the car and waited while she stomped out to the car. And I opened up the back hatch and she measured out 6 feet so she didn't have to get near me. And I took several pictures of this. And I thanked her for it. And then she picked it up and as she was stomping back into the health department, she was ripping it up into shreds because that's what they do. They can't give it to you, but they'll let you take a picture of it. And for many organizations, that is good enough. So in the states where you may have had ancestry, you may want to check to see if they also have a line item for something like this that allows you to just take a picture of the birth or the death record. That's all you need to know. So I also keep a research journal because this keeps me on track as to what I'm looking for. Up at the top, you can see that I have a research objective. That's very important so you don't just go in and start shooting fish in a barrel. So this is what I'm going to find. I'm going to look for John and Joseph Goddard that were ancestors of my dad. And then you can also see where the source, as I just made this table. It's an easy thing to do in Microsoft Word. That source is the very same thing that I would copy and paste and put at the top of a document. Remember the one that I said I made a little box up at the top so that the documentation follows the document? I just copied and pasted it from the research journal. I put down the purpose of the search, and then I put down the information. So here you can see that I'm starting with myself and my husband. And then I went on and made another box, starting with another page for my mom and my dad, began to look for their vital records and, looking to see when I found them in various places. Just looking at that. And then the same thing for my dad's parents, Richard and Fanny. So I'm finding them in the 1900 census, and I'm putting down who all is living with them because Richard is not living with his mom and dad. He is living with I believe it's his uncle. Yeah. So I thought, well, that's kind of odd. I did that for each generation that you would find on a pedigree chart, putting down who it is I'm looking for, and then where do I find them in the census? What does their birth record or their death record have to say? Who is included on their marriage record? All of that information. So this is how I began this search for my dad's ancestors. I knew that there is a high likelihood that they would have come from the Philadelphia region, coming right on down the Shenandoah Valley, probably crossing over at Cumberland Gap, which is right down there where Kentucky and Virginia come together, just north of Tennessee. They could have come up through Pound Gap. And the reason I say that is because the further back I went, I see where a lot of them are living in this area down in here in southeast Kentucky, where Breathitt County and all. But eventually they moved on up to northeast Kentucky. So I've got Scots Irish and Germans and Quakers that I know of. And I've got the areas where they're all living. This is Appalachia, where they all were part of. The particular one I wanted to look at is when they moved to northeast Kentucky, they pretty much settled in the area of Carter County, Kentucky, and a few counties around that as well. Eventually, some of them went over to Logan County, West Virginia, and they worked in the coal mines there. This is actually where my mom and dad lived with my three older sisters when my mom and my sisters all joined the church. And I feel kind of bad for the missionaries because they had to get a map and find out where West Virginia was. They were from the West and they didn't know. But once they got there, they knew. They knew West Virginia. So looking at this map, I mean, it doesn't seem like it's very far away. For those of you that have heard of the New River Gorge and Virginia, West Virginia there, well, that's where this is located. And a good look at that. I mean, it's so tall that airplanes can fly underneath the New River Gorge Bridge. I literally have to, well, I do most of driving now, so I can't drive with my eyes shut, but I can't look off the sides too much because it's pretty far down for the east, maybe not for the west, but for the east. But, at some point they moved from Olive Hill, Kentucky over to Logan, West Virginia. And again, my parents are gone, so I'm having to put together snippets of what I can remember and what my sisters can remember. And my sisters are all in their late 80s. So as I continue this, I'm kind of looking and I'm thinking, okay, well, let's just start this with Dad. So I've got his birth record and I've got the citation for it. And over in that far right column, that's where I list the information that I have on there that is from the actual birth certificate. And then I also make any interesting notations because, I mean, my last name is Clemens, E-N-S, but I've seen it spelled as Clemens and Clemens with an O. So, it's important to remember that there's other spellings that may fall into this. So any interesting notations, I put that on there. So then I continued on, and here's my mom and dad. And I've got, who is this? This is my mom's birth record and everything. So I am listing that, and it verifies she was born in Carter County. And there's both of their death certificates. The one on the left is the one that I went and took a picture of. So again, and that information at the top follows that death certificate. If anybody in my family wants a copy, you're going to get it, but you're going to get the citation too. So I continue to look, and I need to find my family in every single census that they appeared in, from the latest census right back to the earliest one. So I'm looking around and I'm compiling all of this, which is kind of easy. It's easy, I think, easier on Ancestry than on Family Search, but I did use both of them. And I get to the 1920 census, which is a good census to be looking at because I found that in 1920, they ask for how many years they've been married. So I kind of need to know that, but I can't find it. I can't find them in 1920 anywhere. And I'm like, that's not that long ago. I mean, it's 106 years ago. So I'm trying to find my grandparents. It's just not there. And Census Day is January 1st of that year. So I'm like, well, where did they go? Because I'm not finding them anywhere. So I continue on and I have 1940 and I'm looking at my mom and dad on the bottom. Notice how the name is spelled and the citation is on the left. So again, I would copy and paste that onto a regular Word document and then put the 1940 census itself down below. Put any notations about the purpose of the search. And I put down that my mom and dad were married in 1932, so they should be on here. And they are. Now, my sisters' names are Fern, Jean, and Betty. But this is the South. And so you kind of have to go with the way people talk, not in a mocking way, but how would they have said Jean? Well, they spelled it the male way. And Betty, okay, we all know how to say Betty. But down there, y'all are going to say Biddy. Little Miss Biddy at home? No, it's just how it's going to come out of their mouth. You go up one cell, and it's 1930 census. Mom and dad are not married yet. So my dad is probably still in the household of his parents. And over there, it states that he is. Chester Clemens, he's 17 years old. His sisters are there with one brother. And I also put down, it states that Richard and Fanny were both age 17 when they got married, because it says that on the census. It's information that they gave. That's vitally important because I had understood that they got married in the county next door to Carter County. But my dad's family allegedly burned that courthouse down twice. So we're not going to find a marriage record for them. It just doesn't exist. 1920, that's the one. Dad would have been about 8 years old, but I can't find him anywhere. I find all of his brothers and sisters in all the other censuses, but I looked for his mom and dad. I looked for his siblings of George Russell, Mary Ann, Dewey, Chester, Betty, Nellie. I didn't find any of the siblings either. They aren't there. Now, most of us would think, I bet you they just live so far up the holler that the census taker just didn't want to go that far and just went on. That's what a good many people will assume. Oh, they weren't home that day, so he just went home. He just missed that house. Or they just lived too far down the road and, they didn't get counted. That's what most of us assume. That's what I assumed. I was wrong. 1950, I did find my dad and my mom and my three sisters. They are now living. It's interesting. My sisters swear up and down that they moved to Ohio on New Year's Day of 1950. Okay, look at this. They are in, where are they at? Well, they're not in Ohio. They're in Kentucky. No, I'm sorry, they're in West Virginia. They hadn't moved yet. They swear up and down it was a big storm on New Year's Day of 1950. No, on April 1st of 1950, they're still in West Virginia. So that had not happened yet. We go on a little bit further. Back 1920, 1910, 1900. I'm finding the family. I'm just not finding them in 1920. And you know what? If I can't find them, that's going to aggravate me until I figure out why I can't. 1910, look at how the last name is spelled. 1900, this is when my grandfather Richard is living as a boarder in the family of James Brown. That's his uncle. So we go on and we look at this a little bit more. In 1940, when we identify it, my dad would have been married 8 years by then. And there's Ambrose Clemens, or Ambrose, that is living in the household of my grandparents. 1930, Dad's 17 years old. He's at home. Now, let me tell you about Ambrose. It's spelled Ambrose, but that would have been my dad's grandfather. And from what I understand, he was one of the meanest men that ever lived because Ambrose and Marianne Brown, they were married and they had 4 children. Etta B., Richard Lee, my grandfather, Ollie Ori, and Minnie Dory. Now, can you look at this and examine why my great-grandfather Ambrose might have been such a mean man? Just kind of examine particularly the dates more than anything. Because that's the only thing I've ever heard about him, other than the fact that you could tell him what size of a house you wanted, and he would build it, cut all the lumber and everything, and barely have a splinter left over. Well, as we look at this, I want you to look at the death date of little Ollie Ori. Ollie Ori was not very old when he died in 1893. And if you look at Mary, Ollie Ori died in September. Marianne died in November. So all of a sudden, Ambrose is now a single father with 3 children. And they didn't have, and one of them is a baby, little Minnie Dory. They didn't have the social services like we have now. And I think just a lot of bitterness crept in. That's how Richard Lee ended up living in the household of his uncle. All of these children that are still living are living in other places as Ambrose is trying to figure out what to do with his life. So yeah, he did become mean. So again, we got Richard Lee. That's the family right there that I'm trying to find. And he eventually married Fanny, my grandmother. These are all of the children, and you see that my dad is number 5 out of all of these children. And I've got their birth dates, I've got their death dates, and I am trying to find them in 1920, and I can't. So I'm getting frustrated with all of this because I need to know. I need to know where they are. So, I continue on. I'm examining this, and I see that Irene, who they called her Ein, was born in 1919 in Kentucky. And then Charles Norman was born in West Virginia. Okay. So somewhere in between those 2 right there, they must have moved to West Virginia. And then they go right back to Carter County again. So I'm continuing to look. And in 1940, there's my dad, Vern, Jean, and Biddy. And we keep going on. And if you look on the left side of the page, you can see that there is some writing there. Well, I turned the page around, and this is what it says, Middle Rex Camp. I thought, well, that's a coal camp. And I asked my sister Betty, who can remember everything that anybody has ever done, whether you wanted to remember it or not. You look under the occupations, and everybody there is a miner, and they're working in the coal mine. I thought, okay, well, that's a clue. That's Middle Rex Camp. And it looks like Dad worked 35 weeks last year. He made $600. And at his last birthday, he was 27 years old. Okay, well, I kind of know all of this. That the other's interesting, but I'm not finding what I want. So I look for his brothers. Russell and Dewey are also living in the camp, but they're living in Ethel Camp. Look on the left side there. And they're also miners, and they have large families. Each one of them had their wives, each one of them had 18 pregnancies. So I thought, okay, well, I've got them in the right place. This is 1940, but where are they in 1920? I need to know. I went to the Library of Congress and I thought, I'm just going to see if they have any coal mining maps. Well, yeah, I hit the jackpot on this because all of these are, first of all, are little towns and little coal camps. And when I began reading them off to my sisters, like Sarah Ann, way down here at the bottom, I said, Did you know of a town named Sarah Ann? Sarah Ann, oh yeah, we went there all the time. And Ethel, well, that's where my sister was born. I mean, they know all of these places, but these are all coal camps. So my husband and I, we decided to stop and visit in this area on the way back from NGS when it was in Fort Lauderdale. And when on the way back, I'm not really finding what I wanted. I wanted to find Ethel, West Virginia. We saw some signs around there, and there was a man sitting in a shack down at the entrance to one of the mines. I said, Carrie, take me down there. And he says, Are you going to talk to him? And I said, Oh, yeah, I'll be fine. He doesn't scare me. So I went up to him, and I'm going to give you some advice if you have anybody in the South. You don't go up and say, Hi, can you tell me if this is Ethel, West Virginia? No, you kind of got to win them over a little bit. So I went up and I said, How are y'all doing today? I'm fine, ma'am. I said, How's your hound dog doing? He looks kind of tired. Yeah, he's tired. And I talked a little bit more, and I can twang if it means saving my life. And I said, Is this Ethel, West Virginia? He goes, It might be. I said, Okay. Is that road over there? Is that the one that takes you back up the holler where the Ethel coal camp used to be? Might be. Okay. I said, Is it safe to go back there? He said, It depends. Are you packing? And I said, Yes, I am. And I don't miss. My Kentucky mom has taught me how to shoot. He goes, You'll be fine. So I got back in the car and I said, Okay, Carrie, let's go. And he says, Honey, I don't know. I said, I'll save you. Trust me, I'll save you. So we head back to the coal camp, and it's a little scary. I'm going to admit it. It was scary. When we drove back there about 5 miles, you can't tell that at one point there were hundreds of families living back there. You can't tell it at all because it's so overgrown, so run down. There's just nothing there. And at some point I said, Okay, Carrie, let's just turn around and go. And I mean, he turned around real fast. And as we were leaving, there was about 5 cars that were pulling in after us. They had been watching us the whole time because there is a lot of drug running down in this area and a lot of drugs that are grown down there. So it is not safe, for people that can't twang. Let me put it that way. And I can twang. So I told my sister, I said, Let me tell you about the area where you were born and where you spent the first few years of your life. She couldn't believe it. This is also where the Hatfield and McCoy feud was fought, just down the road from where my family lived, as well as Bearwaller Holler. Everybody goes back there, rides their four-wheelers. So Bearwaller Holler and the Hatfields and McCoys. I don't know what was wrong with me going down there, but I found another map from the Library of Congress, and this was even more detailed on the coal companies. So you can see the Ethel Coal Company, that's where my dad's brothers worked. The Rex Coal Company, that's where my dad worked. So this is all coming together for me. Well, after about a year and a half after my mom died, I was speaking out at BYU, and I called my sisters to make sure, that picking me up from the airport, everything was arranged. She says, Have you talked with Dad? And I said, No. And she said, Well, let me tell you what happened. He had made a research trip to Kentucky, and while he was gone, lightning struck the house and burned it to the ground. The only thing that was left, besides a little bit of his clothing that he would need to have, was right behind the front door was a bookcase that he had built that had all of our genealogy in it. So I got back there, went straight to Dad to see what I could do to help. And none of the genealogy was lost. Everything else was lost. You can see here that there's a little bit of water damage on this one, on my dad's picture, but nothing was completely lost, including the journals that he and my mom both kept. So I thought while I was doing this search back on the census records, is there anything that could help me that dad may have written or mom may have written, anybody might have written? So he states in there that my oldest brother Russell and my father both worked in the coal mines. And although we were poor people, I cannot remember a time when we went to bed hungry. Okay. And then he says, as well as I remember, we lived there about a year or more before trouble started. The union was trying to organize the coal fields, and the coal companies didn't want that to happen. There was fighting all around. The union men were coming over Blair Mountain into Logan County, and all who would not join the union were called rednecks. And my uncle Arthur Fitzpatrick, a big Irishman who had just gotten out of the army in 1918, and he was tough, but they arrested him because martial law had been declared. I thought, what in the world is going on? And I mean, this sounds pretty scary to think about. And this Uncle Arthur Fitzpatrick, that was actually Edeby's husband, my grandfather's sister's husband. He got out of the army in 1918. What would you assume that he had been in the war for? Which war would it have been? You would have thought World War One. No, he was in the Spanish-American War and had just been discharged. So he was now out in 1918. So he continues to write, him and me started to walk to Logan about 4 miles away, and a deputy sheriff inquired where we was going, and we told him it was none of his business, and he arrested him, this Arthur Fitzpatrick. He handed me his big 45 Army Colt, and he told me not to let anyone take it from me, and I took it back to my Aunt Edeby and gave it to her, and they blackballed him out of Logan County and never would let him come back. It was not easy living under martial law, but we did it for about 2 years or more. Good heavens. I mean, at this time, my dad would have been about 8 years old when this is taking place. And his uncle gives him an Army Colt 45 and tells him to go through the enemy lines and give it to Aunt Edeby. Oh my gosh. But there was one more clue. The death of baby Betty. Remember, all of Dad's brothers and sisters, there was a little girl named Baby Betty. My younger sister Betty, when she was burned so bad by a pot of beans falling off the heating stove in the living room. She was sitting on her sister's lap, and they were rocking in a rocking chair so close to the stove, each time she would rock the chair, she would touch the stove with her foot. And after doing that for several minutes, the pot of beans finally fell off the stove and burned her awfully bad. It took little baby Betty 3 days to die with those horrible burns. There wasn't much that got on her older sister, but baby Betty was horribly burned by this pot of beans. She was 3.5 years old. They didn't stay now that happened in Kentucky. They didn't stay in Olive Hill very long after Betty died. We moved to West Virginia in a boxcar along with a man by the name of Milton Klein. We moved to an area called Rex Camp, which was owned by the coal company. I think it was the year of 1920 when we made that move. It could have been 1919. I was very young and I'd never heard anyone talk in a foreign language. Okay, here's my clues. It was 1919 or 1920 that they moved. Little baby Betty died in 1918. The very next year, her sister, Irene, was born. And she was born in Kentucky. So they're both still in Kentucky at that time period, before they would move to Logan, West Virginia, maybe later in the year of 1919 or maybe in 1920. They would have gone to the local Olive Hill, Kentucky railroad depot. And I looked at the list of Kentucky railroads and West Virginia railroads. all of them there that might have carried them from Northeast Kentucky over to Logan, West Virginia. It looks like the Chesapeake and Ohio would have been the one that would have gone on the Big Sandy Railway. That's what it looks like at this point, which is right up there where they lived. It's now an abandoned railroad. It could have been over there, at a different railroad, but it's in that area there that they would have taken. So this shows the current condition of these, and these are all from the Library of Congress that I found these. Once Dad said that in his journal, I had to know. So this one that was in Olive Hill, Kentucky, you can still see the remnants of the old railroad that are there. That's the end of the line. Or it could have been the beginning of the line, whichever way you were going. And it was a bridge. There's a bridge on the Chesapeake and Ohio line that is still there, but you can't go on it anymore. This is where they would have ended up over in Logan County, West Virginia. So again, we've got trains that are going down into that area. So I looked up the Logan County, West Virginia Railway, and what it states, where the arrow is pointing, is that the sanitary conditions at the depot are irreparable. It's fearful and dangerous to public health. It's a chicken coop of a station. That's where my dad's family ended up, at that depot. They likely would have gone on a train that looked like that. Remember, they were on a boxcar. And Dad and this man next to him, I guess they just had motion sickness the whole time. Dad said he always remembered the slogan. It was sleep like a baby and arrive fresh as a daisy. So I don't know. It might have been like that. But back to this battle of Blair Mountain. During the war between the Union and non-Union, there were many people killed on Blair Mountain. The sheriff of Logan County and some of his deputies was killed, and many coal miners went to work and never returned. The Army moved heavy artillery right by our house by mule team, and we could hear the heavy artillery being fired from our home. He also stated that his mother was scared to death because you could feel the rumble from the heavy artillery. It shook the house. I went back across Blair Mountain to the Boone County Coal Corporation and got a job, but that was the most dangerous job that I ever had in coal mines. I only worked there long enough to get some money to take me back to Kentucky. Okay, it sounds like we're talking about a teenager or somebody in their young 20s. No, Dad is between the ages of 8 and 12 when this is going on. If this happened in 1920, Dad is 8 years old because he was born in 1912. And he's going across county lines to work in another coal mine. And he says it's dangerous. I'm just like, oh my gosh. So this can show you right here. This is the Logan County coal field where all of these different coal mines are located. This again was from the Library of Congress that I downloaded this map. If you look up above that arrow, this one is pointing to Logan County, but straight up above that is Boone County. That's where Dad went to work in those dangerous coal mines. So now it's time to look at newspaper accounts. The air fleet was ordered to the West Virginia battlefield. I mean, this is the cover of the Washington Times. It had this huge headline that the air fleet has been sent to West Virginia to get control over the fighting miners during this battle of Blair Mountain. Over on the right, it says the aviators will drop bombs on the marchers. My gosh. One of the reasons that they didn't really land in West Virginia is because it's West Virginia. There's no place to land. It's all mountainous and hills, and everything that you see depicted on TV is pretty much what it's like there. The government is ready to act. Martial law is proclaimed, and 2,000 U.S. troops are being held. I can't even imagine this. I would have been terrified. I checked on full text when this was still part of the labs thing, and I just did a thing on Blair Mountain. I didn't even look up a name. I just put in a topic of Blair Mountain, Logan, West Virginia. I thought, I wonder if anything will come up. Well, yeah. This is from the Roanoke Times. Heavy fighting reported in West Virginia. The first troop train arrives. I mean, bombs from airplanes force bands of men of armed men to flee. This is a war, a battle going on in my grandparents' backyard. Oh, I mean, and so I've downloaded this and I've got the transcription and everything. This isn't going anywhere. I got to hang on. Warfare rages on the Logan County line that my dad crossed through to get over to Boone County. The West Virginia State Police and deputies are at grips with bands of armed men. It continues on. Troops are prepared to maintain order in West Virginia. We look down here at Logan, which is the county next to the last on the bottom, next to Mingo County. Right next to Logan County is Boone County. And sitting on the border between Boone County and Logan County is Blair Mountain. I just can't imagine right there where all of this fighting is going on. There are markers everywhere depicting what happened at Blair Mountain with people being killed. They're trying to keep the union organizers out of the area. Workers were beaten and abused. There were 5,000 miners that marched to Logan. At the end, there were 1,217 indictments, 325 murders, 24 were arrested for treason, and the miners were defeated. This is also when Mother Jones began. I mean, you either love her or you hate her, and the miners happen to love her. They wore red bandanas on their neck because that was a sign of rebellion in Scotland. And most of these people are Scots-Irish descent. Right there at the top arrow is Ethel, where my husband and I drove up. You can see the road going back. It's also the coal camp where my sister Betty was born. Blair Mountain was pretty much in their front yard. They were kind of protected by a natural barrier, but that's all right there. This is after the Battle of Blair Mountain when they are taking people out of there on the coal cars. And there's a museum down there that I went through that shows all of the different spent shells that if you walk up Blair Mountain right now, take a bucket with you and you can fill it with the spent shells. So my question is, do you really think that they were that interested in taking the 1920 census in this area? I don't think so. I would not, as an enumerator, I would have said, I'm busy that day. I can't go back there. I wouldn't have gone. I mean, these people, you don't mess with them. So after looking at all of this and looking through all of the genealogical proof standards, and especially looking through analysis and correlation of the sources, me not being able to find the 1920 census, I think there's a reason why. But I had to go outside of the census to find that reason. Dad's journals provided a lot of clues but I also have to remember that he was remembering this as he's writing about it in the 1970s. This would have been 50 years earlier. So, evaluating these, you want to make sure that you find your family in every census they would have appeared to, starting from birth to 1950, the latest one available. These will help you to check for migration patterns, which are just as important. Look how important those railroad maps were to me. And to establish the relationship for all people living in the household. My grandfather was living in the household of his uncle because his mean father was out trying to put his life together after his wife and his baby had died. I looked at newspaper and local history accounts, the Library of Congress historical maps, and railroad listings, and Chronicling America. I did look some on newspaper.com, but I found more on the Library of Congress. Journals that were written by my dad. I remember they're written in the 70s. Are they going to be that accurate? Well, when you compare them with the actual accounts, he was pretty much right on spot with it. Because I found that in working with older people, since I have now become one, that long-term memory is often more reliable than short-term memory. I can tell you what I did the day I was baptized, but I'm not sure that I had breakfast yesterday. I don't know. Does the information conflict with official accounts? Dad looked like he was pretty spot on with this. And different conversations that were remembered also. The death of little baby Betty. And then right after that, they moved to West Virginia. And it was a painful time for my dad's family. So as I look through this, and then again, this time I have my grandfather, Richard, in the number one spot. It would have been Richard and Fanny that would have been living where the Battle of Blair Mountain was taking place. And then his father, Ambrose, and Mary Ann Brown, and then her father, Samuel Harrison Brown, taking this right on back till we get to about as far as we can go, till we got to John Littleton Road. I'm taking this all back and I'm like, okay, I'm looking at them because their mother died when they were very young. Their father remarried and another step family was created. And the stepmother wanted them gone, and she arranged with a ship captain to give them a tour of the ship. Now, this is the legend of the family. Why would the stepmother want them gone? Remember my mantra when doing research: to follow the money and follow the people who want the money. If that father would have died, the oldest son would have gotten the inheritance. And the oldest son was not the son of the stepmother. It was the son of the mother who had died when they were very young. So Joseph and John, they were put on a ship to give the captain gave them a tour of the ship. And the next thing they know, they are floating out to sea. Now, at this time, the Northwest Territory, where I live, had just acquired a whole bunch of land after the Revolutionary War. And this is what accelerated a lot of expansion. And I thought, oh, this is so interesting, but I don't have anybody here. And I kept looking and I thought, there's a lot of squatters coming into Ohio, the Ohio country. They feared that they might start their own country. So I thought, well, if I got anybody, I probably got squatters. I mean, that would be my luck. So this land is divided up into land that eventually looked like this. And I particularly want you to look over to the right where it says the 7 ranges. Well, in the meantime, David McCullough wrote a book, fantastic book about the first people who came in to kind of settle Ohio after we acquired this old Northwest Territory. Fantastic book. And I began to look through here and I thought, huh. And then I read an account where in Jefferson County, over on the right, that there were some Goddards that lived there. Okay. Now remember, those 2 boys are brought on a ship that their stepmother arranged for. They're brought into St. Mary's County, Maryland, and possibly indentured to a Hugh or a Daniel French. They were good workers, skilled with apple orchards, but they did a great big no-no when they taught a slave how to read. And the next time I find them, they're in Fleming County, Kentucky. Where did they go? How did they get there? In Maryland, they're there about 1755. In Kentucky, it's 1799 that I find them. They're not really close in proximity. So I am reading David McCullough's book. And I'm reading about stuff I learned in 4th grade and 10th grade and probably just forgot. Until it got to the point where Colonel Harmar had ordered the following people to leave. They were squatters, and you're going to have to go back to the Virginia side. And I thought, well, that'd probably be my family. Guess what? It was. It was John and Joseph Goddard. They were living there in Jefferson County as squatters. And because they were afraid that they would form their own country and try to take land that had not been designated to them, they ordered them to go back to Virginia. And all of the squatters got together and they said, okay, we know we need to go back. Can you give us a little bit more time? We don't have money. We don't have land. Can you give us just a little bit more time? And they all wrote this petition and they signed it. Well, I went to the Ohio Genealogical Society where they have the papers of the Continental Congress and found that original paper where they are requesting, please let us stay. And there are their signatures, Joseph and John Goddard. which thrilled me because I collect signatures. That was my connection to, it's my only connection to Ohio. I haven't found anybody else yet. And this was the late 1700s at this point. For those that may have Ohio ancestry, you may want to download these two books. One is written for children, which I always say, always go to the books written for children. And the other is the official lands book. If they have these for any other of the states that you are researching, I say download them and use them because they are helpful. They are very good. This qualified me to join the First Families of Ohio and also the Society of Families of the Old Northwest Territory. I was able to do it because of being able to follow the family through census records, through land records, through a territorial paper telling them you need to get back to Virginia because we don't want you over here. That qualified me to be a member of that. So I'm kind of excited about it. So when I give this, I always dedicate it to my dad, who was a coal miner, and all of the little canaries who lost their lives because they were stationed outside the coal mines, letting them know that it was safe to go inside. And all of the other people that also served in my family in the coal mines, they also have stories, as some of their families are connected to the coal mines of West Virginia and also to the Battle of Blair Mountain. The top left corner is my dad's brother Russ. The bottom left is his brother Dewey that were living there in Ethel Camp. So with that, I believe we might be done, Gerhard.
Excellent. What a wealth of information you've found there from the variety of historical records. I'm pleased at the depth that you went to find those details. That just shows you how dependent we are on the records that are out there and trying to find what exists.
Well, and also analyzing why my great grandfather had such a reputation of being so mean. I thought, well, he's just a mean man. My sister said that they thought he looked like Einstein with that great big shock of white hair and just kind of wild looking. But why was he so mean? Well, when you analyze what was going on in his life with the death of a baby and then the death of his wife, and then he's a single parent with 3 children. Yeah, I think it just turned him bitter. Just
That and the other family, the children from the first marriage dying
yeah,
at
yeah,
sea, and good gosh,
yeah, yeah.
uh, yeah, that our history is full of twists and turns, and
Yeah,
trying to follow those can be a real challenge.
yeah,
I know of looking for stuff in the census. I remember running across some real anomalies. The uh, I was just doing some general research, and I was following up on Charles Lindbergh in the 1930 census. He's listed twice
oh
in
my goodness.
California and in I think it was it Ohio? I think it was Ohio where he was actually living, but he had flown out to California at the census time, and he was enumerated by
Oh my.
people on the days he was there, but uh, and they didn't follow the census rules. They're supposed to indicate what they found based on the day of the census. And they didn't
Yeah,
always do that. They assumed people had been there since the official day.
yeah. Well, and it would have been easy to assume that the enumerator just missed my family. That they lived
Yeah,
up the holler and he didn't want to go back that far. Uh,
yeah.
or that, they were gone that day and nobody's at home. It's easy to assume a lot of things. But
Uh,
when I went into Dad's journals, which led me to the Library of Congress, where there was just a wealth of information, on the coal fields and the
Yeah.
railroads and the newspapers. I thought, holy cow. I mean, there was a lot more going on than just an enumerator walking past their house saying, well, they're not home.
A little local war can really have an effect.
Oh my, because they have a museum down there now. It is still talked about to this day. This was a big, big deal because it was when they sent in troops to fire on our own people. That's a big deal. Martial law and dropping bombs
Yeah.
on them.
Was it
Dropping bombs.
6,000 that you said miners that were affected by that?
Let me look real quick here. Um,
Oh, that's a lot of warm bodies, a lot of
oh, it is.
families that would have been disrupted. When you think of them and their families that may have been there with them.
I know.
Uh,
Well, and okay, it says here there were 1,200 indictments, 325 murders, 24 for treason, and the miners were defeated. So, if they would have gone in and killed those miners, look at all of the families that now would have no male head of household anymore. They had a
yeah,
lot of single women and nobody to marry because they all were in the Battle of Blair Mountain.
yeah, that's right. Uh, Hey, thank you for the wealth of information and helping us remember the depth of research that's possible and really required for having a broad understanding of our families. Uh, when you first presented this topic to me as your suggestion, I assumed you were going to end up finding them in the census,
Yeah.
but apparently not. There are
No.
reasons that records are missing, other than the misspellings that we see so frequently.
Yeah, and I tried looking under my grandparents' names because that would have been 1920. They would have had a lot of children in their house. There was nothing there. So I began to look under each child's name to see if they appear in the 1920 census, and none of them did. My dad would have been 8. He should be in the census.
Should have been, yeah,
Should have been. Yeah.
yeah. Well, thank you so much, Peggy. I appreciate the how you stuck to the research on that was required to learn that. I've uh, I've run across similar things based on the census where things seem to be missing, and unless you're diligent in searching, you don't get a complete picture.
I know. I know what you mean. So I it was I was in it for the chase. I thought, where are these people? If they're in the census, I'm going to find them. I couldn't I couldn't find them at all. At all.
Well, you've given us a lot of great ideas as to what we should be doing too, when instead of getting frustrated with simple searches or even some moderate searches, persistence pays off. You're a great
Hmm.
example of that, Peggy.
Well, at some point, I'm going to meet all of these people. And I don't want to go up to them and say, oh, I am so happy to meet you. I know your birth, marriage, and death date. No, I want to go up and say, I know your story. How in the world did you do it? How did you do it? I mean, to have heavy artillery making your house shake as they're trying to
Oh,
wipe out this community. No, I want to know how in the world did you have the courage to get up every day, yeah, and face that? That was not easy. So,
well, thank you again. We appreciate that. For those of you watching online, if you have any questions, you're welcome to post those. I didn't see any posted on our Facebook page or in our chat on Zoom. So, We appreciate you, Peggy, and look forward
Absolutely.
to having you again in the future sometime.
Right. Thank you, Gerhard, and everybody else that's listening too.